Billy Luna.
John Gotti was ferocious, but who do the ferocious fear? John Gotti was terrified of Vincent the Chin Gigante after Gotti whacked out Gambino family boss, Big Paul Castellano, and Paul's underboss, Tommy Bilotti. Gotti then seized the Gambino family throne. This breach of mob protocol, murdering a boss without the consent of the New York Commission, pitted Gotti against the most powerful member of that ruling body, the Chin. If the Chin was not too well versed about the outer borough thug who had just whacked out Paul Castellano, Gotti was fully in the know about his Genovese family counterpart.
Please subscribe to the Billy Luna channel and like the video. Thank you.
John and his brother Gene told a confidential informant in 1984 that Gigante was used by the commission during the 1970s to execute mafiosi caught violating the ban on dealing drugs. An FBI agent summed up the Gotti's beliefs this way: those apprehended and or convicted normally met with individuals associated with Gigante, and these meetings were usually their last. Take one Carmine Consalvo, tossed from the roof of a 24-story building in Fort Lee, New Jersey, while facing a drug dealing trial in 1975. His brother Frank suffered the same fate 3 months later after a shorter fall, 5 stories from a building in Little Italy. Gotti's renegade crew not only feared the Chin, they respected him. Charles Carniglia, one of Gotti's most trusted contract killers, was caught on another bug calling Gigante smart for his ongoing mental health routine. Carniglia was convicted in 2009 after prosecutors said that he unsuccessfully pulled the same stunt. Pretending to be crazy to avoid prosecution is also known as playing bug. To Bill Bonanno, former Bonanno family boss and son of old-school Cosa Nostra Don, Joseph Bonanno, Gotti and his ilk were hardly men of honor. Bill Bonanno scoffed, "They're a product of the opera generation. Me, 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 me." It's a different mob. The Chin was a padrone taking care of local problems in a low-key fashion, reminiscent of Godfather Don Vito Corleone on the day of his daughter's wedding. Gotti, in a typically showy move, hosted massive 4th of July parties in Howard Beach, complete with illegal fireworks and free food. The Dapper Don avoided joining the military by blowing off his draft board on the very day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Gotti, a guy from Queens, was hardly part of the mob's upper echelon. His base of operations was in far-flung Ozone Park at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. Hijackings at Kennedy International Airport, strong-arm work, and murder were their bread and butter. Gotti was hardly a subtle guy. When the threat of violence wasn't enough, he simply turned to violence. To a made man with Chin's mob pedigree, Gotti was an outsider and unworthy of respect. Even after the Castellano hit, Gigante was unappeased by Gotti's public denials of the murder or his immediate election by Gambino captains as the family's new leader. In a private conversation with his son, John Jr. Gotti, the Teflon Don sneered at Gigante's crazy act, saying, "I would rather be doing life than be like him, dressing up, playing crazy." Gotti was a guy who nursed a grudge, like the one he held toward Castellano, and he cared a lot about making money. Gigante took a more benevolent approach to the cash generated by his illegal operations and his loyal staff. Chin was very well liked by his crew because he didn't ask for a lot of money from his capos, his soldiers, said federal prosecutor Greg O'Connell. Gambino underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano agreed. He ain't that interested in the money. He already had a ton of money. His biggest problem was where to hide it. He didn't take money from most of his captains. 3 different law enforcement sources say the murderous Gambino boss was petrified of the ruthless Chin. Gotti had a penchant for gambling and sometimes got in over his head. John Gotti was terrified of Gigante, said FBI agent Bruce Mao, once the head of the agency's Gambino squad. He knew the Genovese were the most powerful family, very tough, a vicious family. I'm sure that John Gotti was fearful of Gigante, agreed O'Connell, noting the Chin was apparently afraid of nothing. Former Colombo capo and Mafia rat Michael Franzese echoed the law enforcement assessment. I believe everybody feared Chin, even when Fat Tony Casellano was boss, said the so-called born-again gangster. It was pretty much common knowledge that Chin was no fan of Gotti's. While the Chin's gambling was limited to fixed card games with his Greenwich Village cohorts, Gotti was a wild bettor who couldn't get out of his own way. Secretly recorded tapes found the dapper Don bemoaning his leaden touch while betting football, including losing $53,000 betting in a single weekend. I bet the Buffalo Bills for 6 times. They're getting killed. 10-0, he griped on a wiretap November 11th, 1981. I bet New England for 6 times. I'm getting killed with New England. I bet 6 times on Chicago. They're losing. I bet 3 times on KC. They're winning. Maybe they'll lose, those motherfuckers. The Chin, despite decades of federal pursuit, was never heard on any wiretap discussing his multi-million-dollar businesses or any other matters of organized crime, as opposed to Gotti, who talked his way into a life sentence after the Casellano hit. Yet when the feds secretly planted a bug in an apartment upstairs from the Ravenite Social Club, they captured nary a bad word from Gotti about Gigante. In so many conversations in the Ravenite, John Gotti badmouthed everybody, the Colombos, the Lucchese's, said Bruce Mao, who listened to hours and hours of tapes. And every time it got around to Chin, Gotti almost always lowered his voice like the old E.F. Hutton commercial. Well, the Chin says, Gotti was shook. Even when alone with his most trusted Gambino associates, Gotti would never admit to any complicity in the Casellano killing. He seemed haunted by the thought that somehow, some way, word of his treachery would reach Gigante. Gigante was the anti-Gotti, to the extent that Gotti brought law enforcement attention, couldn't avoid electronic surveillance, promoted people that he shouldn't, and created internecine warfare, said Ron Goldstock, the former head of the New York State Organized Crime Task Force. Gigante was exactly the opposite. No matter how we tried, there was no electronic surveillance. People in the family respected him. He resolved problems rather than fomenting them. The people surrounding him were tried and true. Members of the Genovese family, also known as the West Side, never spoke Vincent the Chin Gigante's name aloud, instead pointing to their own chins when referring to him. Mao said Gotti yearned for the kind of reputation and respect accorded the Chin. I'm sure he was envious, said Mao. The one thing John respected was power and money. Atlantic City mobster turned rat Phil Leonetti, in a conversation with Gambino underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano, got the lowdown on the feud between the nation's top 2 mobsters. Sammy told me that John hated the Chin, Leonetti recalled. But I think it was because John knew that he would never have the power that Chin had. I mean, the newspapers and the media made John the dapper Don, but to the guys on the street, guys in the mob, they know it was the Chin who was the real power in New York. And I think that irked Gotti. That as regal as Gotti was, he couldn't trump this guy in a bathrobe. When Gotti ascended as the new Gambino boss, Chin never regarded him as an equal, a partner, nor a friend. Gigante viewed the interloper as a rule-breaking cop magnet and general pain in the ass. Gigante, as he did when Philly boss Bruno was whacked in an unsanctioned hit, wasted no time in plotting his payback on the Casellano plotters. A murder contract was placed on Gotti's head after the Chin, accompanied by his brother Ralph, ventured into the far reaches of Staten Island for a sit-down with Lucchese boss Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo. The men, sitting in the home of Christy Tick Funari, agreed that Gotti had to go. Longtime Lucchese soldier Al Diarco recalled the Chin's initial plan was to deliberately not whack Gotti in a quick strike, the way Casellano was taken down. The fuming Gigante wanted to eradicate Gotti's friends and fellow plotters, leaving the Gambino boss with the feeling of a noose tightening around his disrespectful throat. Vincent Gigante wanted John Gotti, said Diarco, who would eventually become boss of the Lucchese's. He just didn't want him killed first. One of the things that Gigante most despised about Gotti actually kept the Gambino boss alive. Johnny Boy's constant attention from the FBI and the press wrapped him in a security blanket, making it hard to hit the new boss. Gotti's headquarters, the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, was tucked amid cramped and crowded streets that made a mob killing almost impossible in the neighborhood. Gotti survived the Chin's assorted murder plots, although he couldn't escape arrest. When Gotti's son John Jr. assumed command of the Gambino family after the Teflon Don was busted on December 11th, 1990, the Genovese hierarchy, in a final slap in the face to the elder Gotti, refused to even meet with the Mafia novice. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments.
Billy Luna.
Please subscribe to the Billy Luna channel and like the video. Thank you.